Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Noz Urbina, and this is Omnichannel X's Omnichannel Podcast. Omnichannel X is brought to you by Urbina Consulting. Omnichannel X is our international learning portal where we host the thought leaders and case studies we think will be most helpful for content-rich organizations trying to build better relationships across all touchpoints. Now, enjoy the show. Thomas Stilling. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello. Thank you.
This is the first time we had Thomas on the podcast. I'm excited to have Thomas here today because I know that we have lots of people in our Omnichannel X audience who are quite CMS aware. We're getting into headless CMSs. We've got our Adobe Experience Managers and our systems like that, which are basically page-based systems that have digital asset management capabilities. However, there is a whole class of digital asset management systems, or DAMs, which is this whole class of system which I know many of our customers are using, but often in a disconnected way. So I invited Thomas here today because he's an expert in these things, to tell us about what DAMs are, how they interact, and how we can work with our DAM colleagues in a more effective way. So Thomas, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for having me. For myself, I most recently have been with Forrester Research, leading digital strategy, and really cut my teeth on DAMs years ago when I worked at 20th Century Fox. So spent 10 years there working with lots of different kinds of assets. When you think about marketing assets, large files, TV, movies, crossing, localization, genres, metadata, all the words that you love and care about when you think about asset management. And it was just such a fabulous moment. And so for me, digital asset management over the years has really been such an interesting field, both to interact with and to continue learning from. So working at Fox, working at Forrester Research, and then also currently I am a course instructor and creator at Rutgers. And part of what I teach there is data governance and governance for assets in general, but also an upcoming certification course that's going to be on AI workflows and leading change through this extraordinary period. So just a couple words and really happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, that's many things I have a deep interest in, and I know our audience does as well. So, can you kick us off with just a definition of a DAM? What is a DAM, and also what is a DAM versus a standard content management system that our listeners might be familiar with?
Absolutely. It's interesting. In one of the courses that I teach, our first question is, tell us how you've interacted with DAM. And often you don't realize it. DAMs are in the background of so many different omni-channel and experiences and journeys that are taking place. So anytime you look at a product, anytime you interact with something, whether it's visual, whether it's audio, you likely are interacting with a product or an item that has been stored in a DAM, whether it's the marketing images, the video images, or the audio files. That's where companies are tracking it and keeping their assets. And so if you think about the difference between a CMS and a DAM, for a CMS, whether it's headless or not headless, you're working with a tool that is meant to publish things, to track versions, and to get the content out into the channel that you're distributing it to. DAM originally started years ago as just a very simple asset management tool. You put things in, how do you find it? And then you put things out. And what it's really evolved into, and we'll talk a little bit about it, is this wonderful cornerstone or foundation that really powers so many omni-channel experiences. And when you think about what it connects to and how it connects, even though you may not know that it's there, it's probably present in all of your organizations, and it's powering so much of the work that you do.
So, if I'm right to make this distinction, that DAMs, when we have a little bit of a fight over the word asset here, because we talk a lot about content assets,
Mhm.
and managing your content as a business asset, and asset. But when we're talking about DAM, we say that we're digital asset, there's actually a slightly different definition there. You're dealing mainly more with photos, videos, PDFs, things that are not web text.
Correct. It tends to be less copy. That's not always the case, and it depends on the industry. So, and depends on the branding and what the tool is trying to accomplish. But typically, DAMs were originally used for, as you said, video assets, audio files, image files. All the different varieties and downstream, upstream assets that are moving. And so when you think about what's on a CMS and you're publishing, DAMs traditionally don't have that publishing motion. They are meant as sort of core functionality of storage and adding in other layers, so access control, adding in versioning. And so there's a lot of really interesting use cases around the fact that you are storing these assets and then how are they used in your organization.
And then licensing as well. That,
DAM can track licensing, but there are separate categories of tools that are much more efficient. And I think what you'll find nowadays is that, like many tools, DAMs are trying to be all things. And so they have overlap into licensing. They may have some light publishing capabilities. They likely have AI capabilities now in what we're seeing in these last couple of quarters. And so you've got this sort of what was originally meant as a dedicated tool to do a thing, now working to become a Swiss Army knife. And there's
mm,
pros to that and there's cons to that when you run into it.
it makes me a little crazy. I have this thing with software. I have a love hate relationship with software because I love I love a good tool as everybody does in this
Always need a
industry.
good tool and functional tool, right?
Gotta have a good tool,
Yep.
but Lord God, do they always want to just keep expanding what they do? I'm not going to mention names, but certain very famous CRM system which decided it's going to be a knowledge base and decided it's going to be a web publishing system. It's just like
Mhm.
th- it's the I are you familiar with the mock architecture?
Yes.
Yeah, so this idea that you can provide lots of capabilities, but let the people mix and match to build the systems which make sense instead of having these massive, beastie overlapping systems where you got your CMS that can do DAM and it can do taxonomy, and your DAM does taxonomy, and so do you have a kind of um, picture of what you think good looks like in terms of distributing the load between these systems? When do I know I need a dam versus just whacking images and videos in my CMS?
Well, I love the question because oftentimes organizations know what they don't like and what won't work. And sometimes they start from there, which can be useful in sort of a scoping exercise to understand what you don't need and what are the requirements that are not a priority. But I think good right now, there's two different sort of approaches that are working for DAM. To your point, I think the mock architecture is wonderful. You have this ability to really find the capabilities that you're looking for, and generally, that's lightweight systems and tools that can connect, whether through API or through another layer. And that is something that you can then build over time and can be really flexible for your organization. It also could have some positive cost impact. There are some wonderful ways to sort of slice the onion with a couple of different tools. And then you get what your organization needs the most of. The second category, which is sort of what you're talking about, these sort of big omnibus tools, which have everything and rolled into one, there is an elegance to that. And I appreciate that companies who have enterprise rollouts and are really trying to target, perhaps hundreds or thousands of users, having one system that is one label, one user interface, really has value. And if you think about a typical day, if you're no matter what role you're in, the moments of task shifting that we do across our different applications and across our own work can be more complicated or perceived as more difficult and pain points if you are constantly using different UX and having different experiences. So I think good for me, really, and for an organization is defining what do you need. And it's the core tenet of governance when you think about governance for digital asset management, for CMS, for any type of system that you're putting in play, is defining what you need. And then when you look, you'll know what good looks like for your organization. And that can be very small or that can be more complex. But it really comes back to what do you need to be successful and to meet your goals.
I can envisage a future. I'm interested in your opinion on this. I can envisage a future where, in the same way that when we deliver an experience, we expect to the external audience the the tech stack under that to be completely invisible. Like I don't go to a website and go, I'm in the CMS now. Now I'm in the CRM. That
But
is
sometimes you do, which is
sometimes you
interesting.
do.
That's a bad design
Yes.
choice.
Yes, but the kind of the so we didn't define mock. So mock is microservices, and microservices is simply this idea that you package up these little services rather than having the big piece of software. It's digested into these different services which can be called by different applications across your tech stack. API first. Um, again, a very techie word. So I've got acronyms on top of acronyms here, but API first is the idea that it was designed for integration. It wasn't
Right.
designed to be monolithic and then integration is an afterthought. It's designed with integration from the ground up. Um, there's two different definitions of C. Cloud is the one I see most often. There's another one I can't remember what it was. Cloud or component, something like that.
Yeah.
But basic, I think cloud is the correct one, and then headless. And so if if we're moving in this headless direction, where you're building a layer that is the interface point with whomever it is on the outside,
Hmm.
and that's going to pull from the DAM, from the CMS, from the CRM, from technical documentation repository. It's going to pull this experience together from whatever systems it needs to, because they're all disconnected from, they're not directly part of that. Why
Hmm.
can't we have that internally? Like, to address exactly what you're talking about. Why do our internal people have to go into all these different UIs and different experiences
Yeah.
when it would make a lot more sense if we could build them interfaces which were decoupled?
Yeah, and I think you've got a great point. One of the challenges is when you look at tools that do both microservices and have a user experience moment, is often you see tools that don't do it well. They're trying to do too many things at once. So maybe they built in some microservices, which for a user means I can be in the tool that I know and I love. And I have these capabilities, and behind the scenes, I don't really need to understand what's in that stack. To your point, I can just do the work that I need to do to be successful. I think where tools are sort of struggling is when they try to have a designed experience and a microservices experience. And then you get this really interesting moment of I'm almost in the tool
Mhm.
that I know, but I sometimes have to go somewhere else. And so, whether it is a DAM or a CMS or a CRM, if you can bring these things together on an almost agnostic layer and
Mhm.
allow your users to really benefit from the different pieces of functionality, you have a win. Now, so for example, when you talk about going to a place, DAMs used to absolutely, and still are in many cases, the destination. You go to a thing, and many companies will customize it. So if I'm putting in, 100,000 assets, or I've got 500 video images, or I've got, different things I'm using for my marketing campaigns, it used to be a destination. You would go to the DAM, you would search, you would find your assets. Maybe you would assign rights to them, some light rights management. You would tag some metadata to your assets, and then that could flow into an ecosystem. But often, still, when you look at organizations, you go to the DAM and then you go somewhere else. And so one of the moments that I get really excited about, and there's a great segment in one of the conferences that we attend called the DAM Bake Off. And one of the scenario is you put these DAM vendors and providers up on the same stage, and they have a short amount of time to demo to the exact use case. And when you see integrations work, like when they're integrating with, just your favorite image tool, when they're integrating with, your taxonomy, when things work, it is very exciting.
Mm.
As soon as you have to start scrolling and you're clicking and you're bouncing around trying to fit the pieces together, that negatively impacts the user's efficiency and what they can do for output. So it's very exciting where some of these tools are going because it's moved beyond what was the core functionality of DAM. And when it connects, it's a beautiful thing. And when you're just clicking and scrolling, like I said, it can be painful.
Some of the examples which I've seen my clients doing it really well, they are, when you make a web page, for example, you can't insert anything
Hmm.
that didn't come from the DAM. So you are using the CMS, but every time you want to insert an image or a video or a download, etc., that always comes from the DAM. People can't just upload stuff, throw it on the CMS somewhere.
Well, there was a great anecdote someone was telling me the other day about a marketing campaign that was happening in Germany, and the key art was all locked down. And so, just to go
Yard?
back to the theme around governance and standards and how do you, sort of enable your outcomes, they screenshot the image from the DAM. They then modified it in a separate program, uploaded it back into the DAM as a new image with metadata to completely defeat the workflow. And
Oh,
that got them into brand compliance issues. It got them into standards issues. And unfortunately, they also had incorporated an image within the image that was not licensed. And so it was sort of this trifecta of problems. Um, and it sort of makes me smile a little bit. No matter what you build as a tech stack or what you build as a tool for your teams, the human mind is very creative, and water will seek to run downhill. And so part of what we do when we put these systems together is we have to be really thoughtful about where do they play, how do you interact with them, and what's that access and the rules that you work with. But yeah, it was a really interesting scenario of how they completely bypassed all the existing workflows, which weren't very tightly controlled anyway. And so it was sort of a symptom rather than the problem.
So that takes us to some interesting questions. So if you are on the CMS team and you know there's a damn team kicking around, but you're not properly integrated, so, what's how do we start that dialogue as CMS
Mhm.
people to try to integrate what are the two of the biggest content repositories that possibly in the brand?
Yeah, and for ownership of systems, which organizations can get really tied up about, often, but not always, the CMS will be controlled by one part or one part of the organization, and the dam will be controlled by another part. And everyone has good intent, but time crunch, focus, what are our priorities and different budgets? Maybe the two never meet. And I think really when you start that conversation, it is a change moment. And one of the things, if you're overseeing a CMS, to go back to a note I made earlier, what do you want to accomplish? And I think part of that is education. Once you decide what you want to accomplish, part of it is education and going to the owners of the dam team and learning about the capabilities. It may be that they've got a wonderful system that you just haven't been made aware of, or it may be that there is sort of an older model, so to speak, sitting in the garage, and it really isn't meant to interact with the CMS. And so beginning that conversation and learning about what are the requirements, what are the capabilities that we're looking for, and then how could the systems work well together, becomes good old change management practices. And I
Hmm.
think that often gets skipped over, and you go people who jump into a technical conversation before they really define what the business outcomes are. And so it should be grounded in that. And then you can have the requirements and the technical use cases that you're trying to achieve and how that you want them to integrate. So like, what are some of the problems that you're seeing most with CMS? Because for us, to that point, like if it's your earlier example, if a CMS is already connected to a dam and they're attempting to do rights and workflow around it, that's a positive step. If your CMS is one in which you are reaching out and you have to take additional steps to get a thing from the dam, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But often it's really understanding the capabilities and knowing, okay, what do I need to be successful for this outcome?
So we had examples, for example, in pharma where it was just they people didn't have the assets available. People didn't know what was available to them, um, or there's this kind of we're hitting the scale problem all across the content world. So
Hmm.
you just can't have one global enterprise search. As much as we want, kind of like the executives will all say, "Well, I'll just put in my question, and I'll get my answer." Um, we want to pre-filter that. So I want to know, I want the assets that are for my brand. I want the assets that are for my region. I want the assets that are current. Like just cut out tons of these results and give me something that's more filtered. Um,
Hmm.
on the flip side of that, we have this problem with both DAM and CMS, which is tagging it to do everything I just said. Who's going to tag all this stuff so that you can do all this filtering on the front or back end?
I know. And so tagging is where I think there's a lot of excitement and it's so interesting in the market. So findability, you're absolutely right. I need a thing. How do I go find this thing? And so an asset without metadata, and I forget how many years ago we did a talk at a finance conference. We were talking about that an asset without metadata is basically useless. And so if you have an undescribed object, you can't find it, you can't use it, you don't know where you can use it. And so, what do you have to start? So, one of those foundations is the ability to tag an asset, a digital asset, in a way that's useful to the organization. And what is exciting about AI and some of the automation, what you're seeing out there with a lot of these tools are automated tagging, where they take our photos, for example, and they, identify who we are, comments around what we're wearing, maybe because it was sourced from a specific agency or, outlet. There's some other additional information about, where we're sitting, what time of day, general descriptive metadata.
Hmm.
But I think when you pair descriptive metadata with more around how you can use it, that sort of
Hmm.
licensing and that access, then you get very interesting results. And what often happens, and a question that came up earlier in the spring when we were at a conference, is an executive from a gaming company said, "Well, I have a problem. I have, several terabytes of data. These are images, these are components, these are different pieces for the games that we're producing, and I don't know where to start." And my question back was, "Well, what is the challenge specifically?" And they said only 20% of their assets actually had quality metadata, and the rest of it was incomplete. And so if you don't describe a thing in a way that you can find it, it doesn't exist. So it's, if a tree falls in the forest without metadata, yeah, the tree didn't fall.
Yeah,
um you know
page 7 of Google.
yeah. Right. So
So, well, that raises the buzzword of buzzwords, which is AI. Uh,
AI.
AI. So, what I'm seeing is that everybody in all the systems wants to put in all the AI features that they can think of and cram them into their software. What do you think are good uh, implementations of AI in a DAM, and what
Mm.
do you think is probably better done in another system?
Yeah, and it's a real fair question. And the level of AI, and sometimes what I call, what can be called pseudo AI, which is really more around automation or machine learning a little bit. Um, but what's great is, and what gives you a start is automated tagging. And again, it's not perfect. I think, whether it's 80/20, 60/40, it gives you a start. So
Mhm.
that, for example, if you are transitioning into a dam or you're moving your assets, and you have X number of assets that are undescribed, you can walk them through potentially a tool or this functionality and get maybe a starter set of metadata, which is a beginning. And never underestimate the fact that even if there's some, the metadata isn't perfect, you at least have a dartboard that you're working with. So I think a lot of the DAM vendors for automated tagging are doing great work here. I think the other piece that's interesting that blurs the line a little bit is particularly for marketing when you're doing variations of an image. Multiple tools now are taking, say, a flat image for a product. Maybe it's a razor, or maybe it's in the department store or a drugstore, and you can do variations on background. You
Mhm.
can change the image itself, and whether it's templated or workflow, you can get a little bit of that generative AI moment to sort of brute force out the marketing materials. That one I think is interesting, but it works really well when you have a defined outcome that you're looking for. I think where dams are getting a little bit into trouble is if they're trying to reach too far into their creative zone. And maybe they're trying to go a little bit farther in the image creation, or I think one of the companies that has some functionality is not safe for work. I think some of that has less value for the core purpose of dam, and then those creative functions probably should be sitting somewhere else. There's a debate about where they sit, but I think right now that, to your point, AI is getting appended to so many different tools out there in really useful ways, and maybe in ways that aren't as useful or don't fit as much. And I think when you start really crossing over and you're seeing this overlap between what are the requirements for my core asset management versus what are my requirements for a creative team that is really generating and working with original images, where does it begin and end? Some of it to me feels a little bit like salesware. And if, yes, you've got that functionality and it's wonderful and it will sell the product. When you actually look at what a dam is being used for, it is still the core use case of findability and usability.
uh, Storage. I'm this is, I think it was something we didn't address, is that I see one of the big differences between CMS and DAM is that CMS is very often used as your creative space. You create content in your CMS, whereas you load content into your DAM.
Right.
You've created it somewhere else and you put it in there as a for storage, for findability, for accessibility from different systems, but you made it in PowerPoint or Adobe tools or whatever you did. And that's I see that as both good and bad, and I'm interested to know if this is being improved. For example, we'll come back to the farming use cases. We have got tons of PowerPoints in there. Um, and these PowerPoints come out as PowerPoints for presentation. They also come out as PDFs, as downloadables. But the actual assets within each PowerPoint in its entirety, which could be 100 slides, 100 pages, is an asset. But then there's massive duplication across these assets. And I'm wondering if DAM is doing anything to help us trying to address that, because I don't want them to, they can't become the actual, they're not going to make your PowerPoints in the DAM system, but some way of letting us know that there's exact duplication in the different assets in there. Did any of them offer that?
Yeah, no, when you think about deduplication, PowerPoint's an interesting use case because, so for example, version control. Very elegantly, if you are creating a document in PowerPoint, for example, and you are saving it consistently to your DAM, many DAM tools do an excellent job of providing that versioning status, making sure that you're always seeing your last one. And even PowerPoint does it pretty well when you actually go through your version history. But that should be able to enable that. Where I think deduplication runs into the human element is we consistently try to rename and put things in places that we know very well. So, for example, one of the discussions for many, many years in the studios about asset management was, what do you name a thing? And there used to be something called intelligent coding, so that you could look at a code and you could tell that it was a TV show or that it was a movie show. And these
A
codes were
naming convention.
often, sorry?
A naming convention.
Yeah, just a naming convention.
Right.
And so, but what you would happen is you would create your favorite code. Maybe I would create my favorite code. And because dams weren't, as functional as they are today, you'd run into a lot of duplication for multiple types of assets. And I think what dams can do very well is that version control and history and status, a lot around the workflow. It's ready for you to review. I'm going to review it now. You've got
Mm-hmm.
some great possibilities there. The image deduplication is an interesting use case. I think there are some dams, again, like we were saying earlier, that are incorporating more creative and more true generative functionality into their systems, and it can look for similar images,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still evolving. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you're reliant on, so, for example, if you have a dirty set of assets, we call it dirty data or dirty assets, you would take a couple passes with the AI to do automated tagging, to do some deduplication. But at the end of the day, today, you still need a human often to do that quality check and that quality call. So AI is a tool to be used, but it's not the end all be all in a DAM.
Yeah, and I'm also realizing that there's the core use case that we've been talking about with DAM, videos, photos, etc. That's all fine, but where I'm bumping into it a lot is actually where people are loading text heavy documents in there. So I just mentioned the PowerPoint one. PDFs could be hundreds of pages long. Um, do you have any feelings on how that workflow should look in terms of if we're going to handle creation and deduplication outside, how do we make sure that we're governing content, or governing this process, so that when we're putting stuff into the DAM, we can map it back? Like if we have
Mm-hmm.
4 variants of a white paper, they each have their version history and they each have their review workflow, etc. in the DAM. But if they're 80% the same, they're actually pointing back to 80% the same components in our CMS system. So, do you have any kind of insights or thoughts on that particular?
Yeah, the first thing that jumped to mind, and I'm smiling because it's for publishing, for digital publishing. One of the wonderful things, if you are using a DAM correctly and you've got your metadata tagged to it, is that teams. There was a team that I worked with, and they actually were using the DAM. There was metadata on the DAM, but then within the document, they were putting in descriptive metadata. So you would have this conflict between the data in the tagging in the document and the tagging of the container of the document.
Right.
And that caused endless agita as the teams were really struggling with that. Um, but I think when you look at some of the opportunities there, you still have the ability to go to core principles. And again, it comes around to governance and process and standards. So, and I appreciate the question of like, what would you do and what are some things that work well? But again, if you don't have that foundation to approach the work, it doesn't matter the tool and it doesn't matter the process. And I
Mm-hmm.
think whether it's for CMS or for DAM, going back to those basic principles is something that I constantly work on with my own colleagues and clients, just trying to help them understand this is how you approach this and how you move forward. And we were talking at a conference earlier in the year, and someone said, "Oh, it just sounds like really good governance and change management principles." And I said, "Yes, that's the basis for this, and that's the basis of what you can do." But I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but I was thinking about the publishing and
Yeah.
metadata around the container data and metadata in it, and just bad practices that get introduced into an ecosystem, and independent of the tool.
Well, I think what we've concluded is it can get complicated fast,
Hmm.
and setting up those processes and the desired state, and discussing that among our teams is vital to untangling that.
Yeah. No, and I think if you think about, in the greater context of DAM and the creative ecosystem, often organizations may have a mini DAM, or they do have a DAM that's connected to the rest of their tools, and it's silent, and maybe it works well. And I think, and maybe it doesn't, but I think when you look at the potential, and to your question back, if a team who owns the CMS is working with DAM, if you look at the potential for real functional ecosystem connectivity and integration, you've
Mhm.
got some amazing possibilities to expedite content, to increase scale, to approve and do quality checks over a higher volume. Like there's a lot of opportunities there. And I think where teams struggle is if they're locked into, I work with this tool and just this tool, you're working with your tool, you're
Mhm.
losing that opportunity. Even if the systems aren't great, working together absolutely produces better, more consistent and streamlined outcomes. And I think that's just one of the key takeaways to highlight.
I think that's a good omnichannel X message to end on. We're and it's coming back to what we were saying before. We're building your tech stack should be one system
Mm.
made of different software applications within that. Um,
Yeah.
and you're going to get you get the best result if you're thinking about it that way, instead of siloed thinking. Okay, well, this is my email tool, and this is my social media tool. It's my DAM tool, and this is my CMS tool.
And then, especially for larger organizations, there's one company we work with that has 22 brands. And so within those 22 brands are 22 separate technical tech stacks and functional ecosystems. And the tool that will save them is not redesigning everything, but really looking at, okay, what are the capabilities you need? What's that foundation? And
Mm-hmm.
then microservices, integrations. You can go a long way very quickly
Mm-hmm.
and for low capex spend, if you're smart and you know what you need to do.
Yeah.
But yes, the problem usually is the silos. And dams, should be part of every conversation in these moments as an integrated function. It doesn't have to stand alone, and it can't push out and overlap too much with your existing.
Processes. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Great. So we're on time. I want to thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us. This is really
Thank you,
interesting
Noz.
talk. We haven't had enough. We have not had enough damn content so far. So I hope this is the beginning of good things. We didn't even get to talk about where your taxonomy should live. Um,
Oh, dam and taxonomy. That's another half hour. We can actually go longer on
exactly.
that one.
I think we should
And
probably park that for a future episode, because I think
yep.
that's a whole topic. I know there's lots of interest in our audience going, okay, but how do I keep these tags straight?
Right. Hierarchy, taxonomy. We can do a wonderful session on metadata and many, many anecdotes to come on that topic.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. Remember to check out omnichannelx.digital. We're running several event series now. It's going to be an ongoing thing, so you can always check out the events tab on our website and see what events are happening. This is we're thinking about different categorizations for this one. We're just finishing up pharma and omnichannel last year, so we talked a little bit about pharma. We talked about DAM. So keep your eyes out on the website and the newsletter for more. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you for having me. This is fun. We should do it again.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.